Welcome to County Fair on Waycross Community Media. Every month we take some time to make sure we can find out what's happening at the county level of government. And this month we have in our studio Chief Synan and Hamilton County Commissioner Denise Driehaus. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
And the reason I've asked you to come here is I want to talk about the Hamilton County Addiction Response Coalition. Can you tell me a little bit about the history of the coalition?
Well, the coalition started about 5 years ago, before I got to the county commission actually. And so when I got elected, I inherited the coalition, and so I'm the chair. Delighted. It's one of the most important things I've done as a county commissioner is chair this coalition where there are 4 pillars that were set up. It's prevention, treatment, law enforcement or interdiction, and public health. And so those they're kind of like they're different silos, but we have worked very hard to connect across silos so that we're connecting the dots from one discipline to the next. And then we've also added the business community, the faith community, the hospital community to make sure that we're kind of rounding out the conversation. The point of the group is to save lives, get people into recovery, and long-term recovery. So that's really what we've been trying to do for 5 years. The work ebbs and flows. I mean, there are downturns, there are upturns. Right now we're in the middle of an uptick. And so when you talk about COVID impacting that, and Chief Synan speaks to this a lot, and I'm going to let him talk about some of what we are seeing happening. But some of it, if not from the law enforcement side so much as from the treatment side. Treatment facilities are still open. They're up and running. A lot of it's happening virtually. And some folks that are in recovery are having a hard time connecting because of the virtual. So we're all getting used to what's going on with COVID world, here in Hamilton County.
And that's important because I think a lot of people might be inclined to think, I can't get help right now, I'm stuck. But they're open. You might have to connect them a different way.
Yeah.
That's really important. Right. I feel like that's a really important place to start, that there is still a way to get help, even if it might not look the same that it normally does.
That's right.
Yeah, you could not have asked for the most worst thing that could have happened when it comes to addiction is a virus. Because when you think about getting people help and getting them into treatment, it's about human contact. And the coalition has made a lot of progress towards having peer mentors, people who have been through addiction before, recovered, connecting that human aspect of it, the quick response teams, the exchange project, all human-to-human contact. And all of a sudden here comes COVID-19, this thing that says you can no longer have contact, you got a distance, you can't talk to people, and it literally shut things down overnight. So there's been a lot of adjustments in how do you work through those restrictions, but how do you still stay in contact? And we knew there was going to be some hurdles. And unfortunately, there has been some hurdles, and I think they do play a long-term role. But that foundation's there with treatment. The foundation of reaching out to people and trying to get the message out is still there. I think what we got to do now is how do we recover from COVID, get back on track with addiction, and continue the progress that we were making just a short few months ago. It seems like we were going so well, and then all of a sudden, like you said, kind of a kick in the gut with COVID and kind of having to start some things over again, not from zero, but how do we reconnect?
I feel like you talked about the different silos, so to speak. The fact that it is indeed a coalition of all these different organizations, that some existed before this, but were operating disconnected, not connected to the other groups. And that on one hand, we need to connect people to each other, but if we connect these organizations to each other, they can all have more of an impact. So as you need to start up again in the COVID world, at least you get to start with all of these connections to faith communities, connections to hospitals, connections to other organizations. Are there ways you have seen maybe some specific stories that you have seen that coalition really helped in some specific cases?
So the example to me is this engagement center that we have set up. So what we were doing was making sure that first responders were on the scene with Narcan. We're very interested in having everybody carry Narcan just in case you encounter someone who is overdosed. But anyway, first responders were going out, connecting with that person. Either they go to the hospital and they're looking for a connection to treatment, or the quick response team goes out a couple days later on the door, tries to get them in the treatment. And so here's the treatment facility, and the question becomes, what treatment? Are there beds available? Are there outpatient spots available? So we set up an engagement center, which is like a triage. So a person spends a few days there. They get us an assessment. They start to detox, and then they are placed in the most appropriate treatment for that individual. We didn't have that for a while, and so we were kind of missing that piece. And so it was challenging to get folks out to treatment quickly. With the engagement center, which was a product of the coalition, we all kind of was like, wait a minute, we're missing something here. That is a good example of how you kind of connect the dots between first responders, law enforcement, treatment, public health, all working together to say, this is necessary in order to get to the next step. So that's the kind of work the coalition does.
And another example and people talk about silos, and we've been fortunate to help some other communities across the country build coalitions, and I always get this question, should we tear down the silos? And I say absolutely not. Denise is the expert when it comes to the political side and the county side of it. Tim Ingram and Jenny Mooney and Greg Kesterman, the experts within health. I'm the expert along with other law enforcement within law enforcement. What we said is don't tear the silos down. Unlock the front door and the back door and allow people to come into those silos and go in and out. You have information and rules that you have to follow. I do too. And it's funny being a cop, you'd think I'd want to follow all the rules, but it's one of the things that drives me the craziest because there's so many laws and rules and restrictions that don't allow us to work as a group often. And that's one of the things the coalition has done is how can we break down some of these rules and laws, let us work more as a group. And a perfect example is that Narcan. Tim Ingram, when he was the health commissioner, was one of the first things we did, get Narcan out to law enforcement. You talk about changing ideologies and philosophies and the aspect of traditional law enforcement that now you're not only going to give Narcan, but then like Denise said, it's evolved into now not only give Narcan, but can we connect you to treatment? And we could not have done that without those silos, the front and back doors being open and allowing each other to come in there. And what we've become really is advocates for each other. If there's an issue on the county side, how can we advocate to help the commissioners? And vice versa, if there's an issue from the treatment side, how can we advocate to get them funding or resources? From the law enforcement side, who do we need to talk to open up some more doors and avenues? So that has really been the power of the coalition, and it's been significant. And when Denise came on board to expand it to the faith community, the business community, the hospital, it's made a significant difference. It brought in that whole community, and we're actually getting more silos that we're allowed to go in and out of, which makes a huge difference.
That's amazing to see because that means from the law enforcement side, you now get to connect in a new way. These other silos, so to speak, metaphorically, give you access to now just not pursue this as, well, we're officers, we have to go from a punishment perspective to how can we get you to treatment, which is really exciting. And it only makes the whole system just work a little bit better and more effectively, I think.
Yeah, we were just having a conversation about defunding the police, and I don't think that's the right aspect of it, is how can we police better? How can we link to better services? And it was Denise that led to change from the Heroin Coalition. At the time when we started it, back in 2014-15, we were dealing mostly with heroin. And at the time, there was probably about 20 to 25 overdoses a week, with about 1 to 2 people dying on average. And then when carfentanyl hit in the August 19th through the 27th of 2016, there was nearly 200 overdoses in 1 week. 3 people died in 1 week, and we've never been the same since. We averaged 50 to 70 overdoses every week just in the Hamilton County, Cincinnati area. And lately, 42 people died last month from overdoses. There's already close to 40 this month. So it really changed our aspect of it. And what we said from the law enforcement perspective was, we've got to change how we do things. Maybe we should be the link. As a cop, my tools to deal with addiction, mental health, and homelessness are gun, taser, handcuffs, and jail. And that was the name change, because I think you brought it up in one of the meetings. Wait a minute. We're doing more than just heroin. We're doing more than just addiction. It is how do we deal with employment issues? How do we deal with homelessness, addiction, mental health, these social issues? And often that has been on law enforcement. And I think we now are being honest with people and saying we can't do this on our own. We need your help. We want to be a link. I can't do those long-term solutions. My job is short-term. How do we connect all the pieces together? And that's what the Addiction Response Coalition is doing. And I think that's one of the positives of us is having that group. It's cool to sit across people and go, this is my problem. They go, well, I can take care of this, or I can do this, or yes, I can do that, or no, I can't, but here's where I need help. Right. So it's cool to see it in action. I just wish it was more of, you just want to be able to do more.
Yeah. Well, it's all the smart kids in the room. I mean, you've got all the smart people in all of these different areas of expertise, and they're the folks, right? So it is cool to sit in a room with these guys. It's like, what is it again? You know, what? How can we? So a good example, this pre-arrest aversion that we just launched. It's a partnership with the city and the county. Federal grant funded it. So law enforcement is responding to a call, and they have options. They don't have to go straight to jail or arrest someone. A pre-arrest aversion says, is that the best place? And sometimes it is. Or is that person better served in a treatment facility? And they now have the authority to say treatment facility, and then we're connected again with the treatment side with law enforcement. So we just launched that just a few weeks ago, and it's a good intersection between policing and treatment and appropriate response to an individual who may be suffering from an addiction issue and really is not best served in the jail.
This really is a model that we have in Hamilton County for what a lot of people are talking about is how does law enforcement become a piece of a bigger puzzle and not the entire puzzle? Because like you said, you didn't have the tools to do all of those things and reach people in all of those different ways, except that now you do because you're part of this response coalition of different organizations. So it's kind of exciting that Hamilton County has had this in place for, how long has it been in place?
5 years.
For 5 years. So
Yeah.
we have a record we can look back on and we can see its impact.
Yeah, that puzzle thing's great. I'm stealing it, by the way, because
Okay.
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. We were a piece of the puzzle is trying to do the entire puzzle, and what the coalition is saying and what we've asked is, no, we can't do it on our own. How can we connect to those things? And law enforcement often is the first ones there, and I get that, but we're talking about long-term social, chronic, mental, medical health conditions that law enforcement is not able to handle. And we've been talking a long time about this being in the medical community. And it takes a coalition like this. It takes someone who can network. It takes that influence to be able to not only go to other businesses, hospitals, the insurance companies, but state legislators and Congress too. We've been very fortunate that it's been on, coalition has been looked at from the national level. The White House has been down. So we've gotten a lot of attention from it, but you're right. We've been on the forefront of how do we do policing better? More than policing, really. It's how do we provide better services to the community as a whole, and especially these difficult, complex social issues. And one of the things I love about the meetings, we don't go in looking for short-term answers. I cannot stand the phrase, let's pick the lowest fruit, and I don't think I've ever heard that in that meeting. Everyone realizes how complex this is, and we go, what's the complex solution to this complex problem? And that helped out a lot.
And you, like you said, you have all the smartest people in the room to work on
We do.
each problem.
Yeah.
I want to talk about, there's one way that you have put together to give people access to all these different sources in the easiest possible way you could, and it's the OneStop resource centers. So tell me more about that's a new project. So tell me more about how that started and how that works.
I'm going to let Tom do this because he was one of the people that really helped organize all that. But weren't there two, and then COVID hit, and that
Yeah.
was the end.
Yeah, we
So we're
started-
starting back up again. So anyway, Tom will talk
Yeah,
about
we started
the
in
details.
September, and Trina Jackson from Reentry,
Right,
who you're
from
talking about,
Reentry, yeah.
we sat down a long time ago and said, how do we get the resources to people instead of, we knew the system was broken, and this is one of the difficulties with this. Really what you're doing is you're trying to build a mental medical health system out of the criminal justice system. And the puzzle is a perfect example. You're trying to build a puzzle with all these different pieces that don't connect very well. It'd be easy if this was in the medical health care system, because it would flow from front to back as those systems are there. But we realized there were so many pieces around, and one of the hurdles for the everyday person, either the person dealing with the addiction or the family, was how do I get the help I need? I got to go to Forest Park or downtown Cincinnati or Sharonville. I'm bouncing all around trying to get these resources. And what Trina thought about, what if we could bring all the resources in one place? And it's probably one of the most rewarding things I've been part of since the coalition, because now the resources are down at the Justice Center, which was funny because everyone goes, I don't know about the Justice Center. You're
We
gonna
didn't think people would come.
Yeah.
But they did.
And here I am, and the sheriff, we're like the Walmart greeters. What do you need? Come on in.
Yeah,
And-
it's something.
Oh man, it is
Yeah.
cool to see, and I can't remember, I think 200 people have been served so far. The first day we had it in September, we were so nervous no one would show up, and there was a line outside. The exchange is out front, they're dealing with people, everything from trying to get housing to employment to food. Maslow's Army was down there, Umadop,
If you need a driver's license,
driver's license,
BMB's
B&B was there.
Yeah.
We were doing testing. There was assessments done for mental health and addiction on the spot. There's a story of one of the stories that the probate talks about is a gentleman from another country who had trouble speaking English in and out of the court system for alcohol-related issues. He came to the one-stop shop and no one could really understand what he was saying. There was a language barrier, and there happened to be someone in probate who spoke that language. And what we found out was that he could not get connected to treatment. He didn't have Medicaid, didn't have the insurance. They were able to connect him on the spot, and then the last I heard just a few months ago, he's still in active recovery. So that is those success stories that we want to be able to do, but that spawns from, again, that group of people sitting at this table, because all the resources are right there. And what's unique about this group, it's not just anyone within that group, it is the heads of every agency. And that was important, because you need to be able to sit across and go, can you do this, yes or no? If you can't, what do you need? And that's what spawned this one-stop shop, was one, Trina's vision, and then having the coalition of a group of people say, I'll be there. And to be able to have a couple hundred people served. Unfortunately, COVID hit, and we're waiting to get it start back up, but that is something that we have a lot of hope for. Hopefully we can take it into the communities. I know there's been some talk about that. So maybe I think when we're thinking about the future of the coalition, how can we have a direct impact more in the communities instead of like looking at the reports and just saying, oh my gosh, these are the numbers. Can we bring a response team from the coalition, from the one-stop shop, out to the community and provide those services on the spot? I think right now it's a vision, but that would be cool to see where that could go and if we could do that. So the one-stop shop it's really cool and really rewarding to see that.
We had a chance to talk to Trina Jackson a couple months ago because we talked about the Office of Reentry, and she was letting me know about this. And the thing I was most impressed with is usually you hear about resource fairs, and it's various organizations, generally with a representative that cannot necessarily do anything, and they have flyers. And that's useful, and if folks are having those, that's great. But the problem becomes, well, you said I can't get this until I get my license. Well, I don't have a car to get out and get my license. And you're saying I need these papers, but I can't get to that office, and I can't get to this office. And there become barriers to people getting services. And what was really impressive to me is that these one-stop resource centers, you can actually do the thing at this resource day. On the scheduled days when the people are there, they're not going to give you a flyer and send you somewhere else. They're going to work with you right there. And that was really impressive to me.
That was key, and it was one of the things with Trina. I mean, Trina sat in those meetings and said, you cannot just give out a flyer. You must provide some service right on the spot. And that was one of the big things that we were hearing from people was, I'll drive out to spend 30 minutes driving somewhere, and they give me a flyer and go, I can't help.
Or I don't have the right information, so I can't get what I need. So transportation is an issue for many, many of these people. It's a huge barrier. And so to have it all in one place that's easily accessed by public transportation, and by the way, everybody knows where it is, well, okay. I mean, it's right. And the sheriff's been very generous on this because he has allowed this in the lobby on the first floor. So we were a little worried about putting it there, but turns out that was the perfect spot.
Yeah,
so.
and I think 11 people came out of jail and walked right to a table
That's
and
right.
got service.
Right.
So, and we're tracking some of this stuff too, because I think from the coalition, we want to know where are our gaps in the system. So what we can do with that data is we can say, okay, here's a gap. How do we bring those resources to it? But it goes again to the vision Denise had with changing the name to Addiction Response. I remember you sitting in a meeting going, we're doing so much more than addiction. It is mental health, it's jobs, it's transportation, all that stuff's connected. So the one-stop shop was kind of born with that same vision saying, we got to get people off parole or off probation. The state probation parole office is part of this too. You get credits if you come in from your probation or parole, and you get credits towards till the end of your sentence. But how do we get people off probation, parole? How do we get warrants taken care of, all the court process? How do we get child support taken care of? How do you get your license? How do you get a car? How do you get a job? And how do we support you long term? The thing is, people are going to fall, and if we can catch them from falling all the way down at the bottom, halfway, we get them back up, and they're in active recovery. The goal ultimately would be, you still got to go after drug dealers, still got to go to the supply side, but if we can get more people in active recovery than using, then in theory, this side comes down too. And then it becomes more manageable, I think would be the ultimate goal. So all these programs, you hit it on the head. We've been doing this forward thinking for 5 years. all the right people are at the right table. It's just a matter of we got to continually think about what's the next step. We got to be adaptable and flexible, and that's where these programs with QRT leads, the OneStop Resource Center, no matter what it is, it's us as a group being flexible. And the vision of the coalition when it first started was just that. Let's get out of these traditional roles that we all play, and let's figure out how can we be more adaptable, how can we be more flexible, and let's try not to say no. Let's figure out a way we can say yes to something. And it's been pretty successful.
One of the components, one of the pillars you talked about of the Response Coalition was the Interdiction Committee, and you're the co-chair of that. And you just alluded to that. One of the solutions is to also reduce the supply. So there's a lot of emphasis on working with individuals with addiction recovery, but that's still only part of the equation too. So that's another part of it. Are you seeing as any kind of trends in what you're needing to limit the supply of, or anything in particular that we can keep an eye out for?
Well, obviously fentanyl is a big part of it, and the Interdiction Committee is kind of funny because it's really transformed from this law enforcement, and Cedric Robinson, who's part of the Assistant Chief of Cincinnati Fire, Trina Jackson that you met, they're all part of the Interdiction Committee, and I think that's the evolution you've seen. It's not just a cop on the street, but how can we work with these other services? But the ultimate drug that has really caused the biggest issue is fentanyl. No drug goes away. They all ebb and flow. You're going to have people who hype up one drug or another, but there is no drug right now that is killing more people, causing more overdoses, and causing more mass damage than fentanyl. 50 to 70 people overdose every week in this area. 42 died last week. Almost all of it is fentanyl related, and one of the concerns that we've had recently, and the coroner brought this up, was the younger people dying, experimenting with cocaine. Those people just trying it for the first time, and I was telling people, when I was a kid, they used to say, don't use drugs. The first time you use, you could die. I don't think that was necessarily true back then. I'm sure that people did. But with fentanyl, it is 100% true. And we've got a story of some people that were using cocaine and someone felt weird. They had experienced cocaine before, didn't think it was right. The other two had never experienced before. It had fentanyl in it. Nobody knew about it. And then those two passed away.
Well, because the one only used half and then vomited. So he lived. The other two did the whole line, and they both died. So so he's talking about cocaine. Now, so we were the heroin coalition. Well, that had nothing to do with heroin. I mean, it was fentanyl being mixed in with cocaine. And so that was the other reason for the name change. It's a new direction for us. It's a more holistic approach. But it's also just not about heroin. It's about drugs. It's about the abuse of drugs and addiction, the disease of addiction. That's what it's about. It's not about cocaine or but what we are seeing is that this fentanyl is being mixed in with cocaine, with meth, with heroin, and so the danger is that people don't know what they're using and could easily overdose from it, and that's what we've got going on right now.
And the thing with the coalition too that helps out is we can't necessarily control any drug coming in because none of the drugs really are produced in the United States. Marijuana, although I'm sure there's pockets of growing, it's not necessarily the biggest crop in the United States, it's outside. Heroin, poppy seed from Afghanistan, Mexico with methamphetamine, crystal ice. And then we know with fentanyl analogs has been China. Now India is starting to produce more. Mexico makes a more inferior version of it. But we knew that in Cincinnati, Hamilton County, I just sent an email to the steering committee the other day. We got somebody with almost 5 grams of pure fentanyl. You got to imagine that, and they overdosed. That fentanyl came from China and somehow made it across the ocean, somehow made it into the border, and somehow made it onto the street of Newtown in Hamilton County.
And so, that's a lot. That's a lot of
especially
fentanyl.
for one person. That's a lot.
Yeah.
But we can't control that. So what we said is, as a group, our voice needs to be powerful enough to get the attention of the federal government. And we have. Now we work with the DEA, the FBI, Office of National Drug Control Policy. Denise and I have many conversations where the United States Drug Czar calls and checks on what's going on in the Cincinnati area. And what they've said is, unfortunately, Cincinnati, Hamilton County area is kind of a microcosm of what happens in the rest of the country. Whatever happens here, they know will happen throughout the country. And as we spike, so do 20 other states and country. So that drug, we can't control that, but the federal government, if we ask them to put pressure on it, and we've been fortunate to work with Senator Brown and Senator Portman, and they've passed some significant legislation working with people in the coalition, from the Interdict Act, trying to stop drugs coming in through the post office, having fentanyl, putting pressure on China from the administration, to put pressure on them to slow down or stop the production of it. That's significant because that stuff helps us on the street. If you're reducing the supply from that side of it, my thing is always, can we reduce or stop the person actually distributing it before it gets out to the dealer? Because the United States on average catches about 3 to 5% of the drugs coming in. So the vast majority make it in. If we can stop that production before it gets here, I'm not saying it ends drug addiction. I'm not saying it necessarily stops all the death, but it would definitely slow it down, which would be significant for the coalition, because then we could get caught up, especially with the COVID restrictions. It would give us a breather. And unfortunately, the thing that kind of did it for a moment was COVID. What we've been trying to do as mankind to stop addiction, COVID did just like that. But we knew the repercussions coming out of it, and we planned ahead, and we had many discussions. We were having meetings every week with the steering committee because we were so concerned when things opened up, what will be the back end of it, and we're seeing the damage of it now. And unfortunately, there's only so much we can do, but supply always dictates what happens on the street, and you're always chasing that drug. And unfortunately, fentanyl is one of the worst drugs to be chasing because it just leaves a trail of devastation that's just heartbreaking.
I think it's really important to talk about that because I think when people are watching, they think about, like you said, they think about things that they were taught a generation ago when they were in school, and is this really as bad? They told me things, and the answer is yes, this is a new thing. It really is this bad. But it's also exciting that the coalition has the ability to go higher. When you think about how at a county level we can stop supply, you think about on the street, what can we do? But it doesn't start there. And as the Hamilton County Addiction Response Coalition, you can actually go higher and say we need to go all the way up on a national level and stop this from even coming in.
Yeah, let me give you an example. I will not say the name right. This is why I can't. One of the reasons why I can't be a doctor because I can't pronounce it all. But isotenazine was this new drug that Terry DeMio from the Inquirer actually wrote an article about. I had not heard of. I remember ONDCP, Office of National Drug Control Policy, said something about it, but I couldn't remember what they said. But she writes an article about it. That next morning, I get a call from the United States Drug Czar who read the article and go, hey, here's the information on it. I pass it on to the steering committee. That information then gets passed on to the governor's office, who then passes it on to the Department of Health. And literally, I think I got the call on a Monday or Tuesday. By Friday, Ohio had banned that drug, which no other state had banned it at the time. And now internationally, Office of National Drug Control Policy is looking at banning it internationally. So that's the power, not just of having that as a resource, but think about the coalition. That is another partner we have at our disposal. And they do too. They call us often and ask questions or send emails. What are you seeing? And we share the information with them. So that's the power of coalition. But one of the most important things to us, and we talked about it at her briefing last week, was don't forget the human side of this. It's often easy to discount that one person, but we know this, and we each have our personal stories. We were talking about this last week, but there's always a mother, father, brother, sister, son, or daughter who's attached to that person. So you can't discount that. And when you think about discounting that one person, we see the impact. You have a family left behind. That impacts a neighborhood, then impacts a county, then a state, and then a country. It has a ripple effect, and it goes back to all the stuff from homelessness to unemployment to not having a car. All that impacts that, and it's this ripple effect. And I think our vision is you save the one, you don't just save that one, you save an entire family, an entire neighborhood, an entire community, which then overall, for all of us, has a better impact and a positive impact on all of us if we can get people in active recovery, which is the goal.
Absolutely. And I love that from the perspective that I want to think about people as individuals and people. But if someone really wants to think about things in terms of bottom lines, it also says this is why it's cost effective to spend resources in this direction, because this is going to prevent the need for so many more services down the line if it can be handled at that one level.
Well, and what we haven't mentioned is that we do collectively go for federal grants or state dollars as a coalition. So in the past, each of these organizations was writing a grant for this, writing a grant for that, and they're all going after the same grants. It's like, wait a minute, we can do this together and be successful, and that's what we did. And pulled down some of these federal dollars that are there, state dollars are there, because we're doing so many innovative things, and then what we have becomes a model for the state. So the quick response team, where a police officer and a treatment specialist literally go on the door of someone who is overdosed. A couple days later, we've got the data, we go visit that person, try to get them into treatment. That has become a model for the state of Ohio. It started in Colerain Township. So that's, promoting what we're doing, trying to get resources collectively, and then impacting lives. I mean, that's what we're doing. And this affects all age groups, all races, all gender. I mean, two genders, the geography of the county. I mean, it's everywhere. I've got a map. I don't know if the camera will pick this up, but who doesn't like audio visuals? So you can see every part of this map is lit up a little bit. And so we've got hot spots, but you can see that it's county-wide. And so no one's immune to what's going on in Hamilton County. And everybody needs to be hyper-aware of how to carry Narcan, just in case, and just to know what you're looking at, and especially for somebody that is like a young person going to a party, picking a pill out of a bowl, that could be laced with fentanyl and that could be deadly. So there's some real dangers here.
And I was going to say too, I was just thinking about the support of the coalition. I mean, it's hard for law enforcement to stand up and talk about these harm reduction stuff, whether it's calling 911 after overdosing, using Narcan. Denise was a big part of the Good Samaritan law. Now we have the Good Samaritan law that you won't get in trouble if you're calling 911. We're talking about supporting exchange projects where people are exchanging needles.
It's a change.
Yeah, fentanyl test strips. And as a law enforcement officer, it's tough to stand there because I struggle internally from the traditional cop, that person that overdosed, 5 grams of fentanyl. And I kept thinking about, why aren't they taking him to jail, man? That's a lot of fentanyl. And then someone popped in and goes, they kind of hit me in the head, go, Good Samaritan law, you know Denise, and I'm like,
right.
Oh yeah, I forgot about the Good Samaritan law. But it's just this kind of thing of the struggle of traditional law enforcement to this new harm reduction, but having the support of the coalition who says, hey, if we do needle exchange, it reduces hepatitis C, HIV. If we can connect somebody there, we can connect them to treatment. That helps your job as law enforcement. If we give someone a fentanyl test strip, that kid who for the first time using, who might use that, may not use because of fentanyl and they stay alive. And we often get the pushback that you're enabling drug use, which I think our pushback really is what we're enabling is life. And ultimately, that's my job, that's Denise's job, that's the coalition's job, whether it's mental health and addictive services, Talbert House, the Prevention First, whoever it is. What we're really trying to do is save lives. And from the beginning of the coalition, there was 3 things we identified right off the bat. One was saving lives, and I think that's our mission always. And when you're talking about enabling, that's it. The second was getting Narcan out. The third was changing the stigma, and those are things we still work on. But I think all of us would stand up together and say, we will try anything we can to save someone's life, because we deal with the families afterwards, and we know that it's never just one person. So the human aspect of it, I think, has been very important to all of us. And if we're going to enable anything, we're going to enable life. And if we get criticism for that, I think we're all kind of good with that.
That's right.
And all of those great resources that you've put together won't help if they're not alive. They really need to be
right.
We do want to get them beyond just enabling, but they can't get there if they need to be alive for that. The isolation of the stay-at-home order and COVID-19, how have you seen that affecting addiction in Hamilton County?
Well, it's just an added stress. We're all stressed out because of isolation and COVID-19 and everything that goes with that. But people that are in recovery, that are somewhat vulnerable, really, if they're not connected with the support group that Tom referred to, if they're not connected with the treatment provider, it's a little more challenging. So while the treatment providers have remained open and are accessible, that person-to-person isn't always possible, and so it's added a stress to the folks that are in recovery, and we have seen that as a challenge. The other thing that's kind of weird we learned was that when people were revived with Narcan, a lot of times they didn't take the transport to the hospital because they were afraid to go to the hospital because of COVID-19. Right? So it's like, wait a minute, what? And so what we were seeing was that sometimes people don't take the transport. That's always been the case, but there are higher numbers right now because they're afraid to go to the hospital. So that connection to treatment doesn't happen. And so the quick response team then kind of goes out on the door like I was describing, but we had to shut that down for a while because people weren't opening the door to anybody, because of distancing. So we're back up and running again, and the numbers are high with the quick response team, higher than what's usual because people aren't taking the transport to the hospital. So those are all direct impacts related to COVID-19, and just makes everything just a little more challenging.
I want to make sure that because of all that, and because the numbers are high and people weren't able to connect for a while, that we tell people before we finish how they can connect. Where can people connect right now if they're watching this and they're thinking, I need to connect to these services?
Well, one's a number right off the bat, 513-281-7880. It's the Addictive Services Council, and I kind of describe them as like a treatment broker. They'll find out if you need insurance, kind of do an assessment on the phone, or have you come in and do an assessment. Where's the best program that fits you, and kind of tailor that program to you. So 513-281-7880. And obviously you can go to the Hamilton County Addiction Response Coalition website. Look on your right-hand side, and there's a list of all kinds of providers and treatment providers and resources for that. So those are a couple quick little things that people can look at to get some kind of help and get back on track or get the help they need.
Well, and the first one's a hotline. So that
Yes.
first one is open 24/7.
Excellent.
So that's the kind of the front gate, and then from there you get connected with the most appropriate treatment.
Well, I want to thank you very much for coming in. I feel like we've talked about a whole lot of things, but also that it was just the tip of the iceberg, and we could keep going for a really long time.
Oh yeah.
That's true.
So hopefully we'll have a chance maybe in the future to talk about more and to talk about how everything is opening up again once we see the one-stop resource centers coming back and all of those things back in. But for now, I just really want to thank you for coming to the studio and making sure we got a chance to talk about these things. Is there any last thing you want to make sure people know about?
First of all, thank you for having us.
Yeah.
This is a very important topic, especially with all that's going on, so it's extremely important. Most important thing, carry Narcan. Call 911, because that one kit of Narcan may not be enough. We had an overdose in Newtown we just found out about that was unreported. They used 3 kits of Narcan. Didn't call 911. So fentanyl can stay in your system longer, stay in your system longer than the Narcan can. So there is a chance, if you can follow me on this, you can re-overdose on the dose that you're already overdosed on. So it's extremely important that you call 911 after to make sure that we can get more fentanyl if we need to, make sure that you stay alive. If someone's not breathing or the heart's not beating, give them CPR, your breath techniques, and then also fentanyl test strips and exchange, and call for help if you need it.
So help is there. There are many, many providers, really good providers in this community who care deeply about the people they serve. Help is there. You just need to reach out, and there's no better time than now to reach out and get connected with treatment.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you.
I think
Thank
that's
you.
the biggest thing is help is there.
That's right.
And thanks for being part of the people that make that help available.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yep.